Hi, I'm Dave Howard, Executive Director of Louisville Folk School. As a description for the visually impaired, I'm a white man in my 40s with a beard, wearing a denim shirt, and a music studio filled with folk instruments. I'd like to thank Kentucky Performing Arts for their partnership. On behalf of Louisville Folk School and Kentucky Performing Arts, welcome to our conversation series, exploring the African American influence on Kentucky music. This program would not be possible without your support and the support of the Kentucky Tourism Arts and Heritage Cabinet, South Arts, the IBMA Foundation's Arnold Schultz Fund, Kentucky Humanities, the Awesome Foundation, Brown-Forman, Tilford Dobbins and Schmidt, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. As we explore the stories of African Americans who've had a significant influence on the folk music traditions of this land that we now know as Kentucky, we'd also like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of this land. We honor the Chickasaw, Shawnee, Cherokee, and Osage peoples who've lived here for over 10,000 years and remain here today. I'd also like to invite you to participate in this conversation. During the question and answer portion, you can use the comment feature below. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us today as we learn more about the godfather of bluegrass, Arnold Schultz. My name is Michael L. Jones. I'm a Louisville-based music historian and author. For the visually impaired members of our audience, I am an African-American man with glasses and I'm wearing a black and gray patterned shirt. I'm seated in my home office with two bookcases behind me. Today's discussion is the finale of a three-part series entitled Exploring the African-American Influence on Kentucky Music, which is being presented by the Louisville Folk School and Kentucky Performing Arts. I will be co-moderating today's conversation with the American Songster, musician and historian Dom Flemons. It is a pleasure to welcome my co-moderator right now, joining us live from his home in Chicago. How are you doing, Dom?
Oh, I'm doing good, Michael. Dom Flemons. I go by the American Songster, and I'm a musician, historian, and scholar. And I'm sitting in my record room here in Chicago, and I'm cascaded by different records that showcase the different parts of Arnold Schultz's legacy. And I've got a pile of papers in front of me of different notes I've picked up getting ready for the discussion. I'm wearing a blue and white plaid checkered shirt, two suspenders, and large spectacles, and on top of my head, an Australian hat.
Next, we welcome Dr. Richard Brown to the screen. He has joined us from his home in Cambridge. How are you doing, Richard?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing good too.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm a African American male. I have a I'm 76 years old. I'm wearing a blue button-down collar shirt that has kind of a grid pattern on it, maybe little checks on it. I'm actually a dentist, and I'm also a mandolin player. I've been playing bluegrass for 55 years or more. And I also am on the board of the, I used to be on the board of the Bluegrass Museum in Owensboro. I am now on the board of the Bluegrass Foundation, and I have a band called the Reunion Band. I practice dentistry in Cambridge. I also teach at Harvard Dental School a couple of half days a week. I'm probably have said about enough. I helped found the Boston Bluegrass Union, but that's enough. That's enough. Okay. I'm sitting in my third floor room surrounded by a lot of papers, and it has a nice skylight coming in, and there's a culum hanging over, hiding probably a bunch of other papers. and probably a lot of things about bluegrass and also things about taxes and all that. But we won't mention all that.
Okay. All right. And last but certainly not least, we want to welcome Keith Lawrence to the screen. He has joined us live from the Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame and Museum in Owensboro, Kentucky. How are you doing, Keith?
I'm doing great. I hope you all are too. I'm a European American, follically challenged, and wear glasses. And behind me, we're in the picking parlor at the Hall of Fame. On the wall,
it looks like your sound is coming in and out on us. I hear you better now. So, at the end of our conversation today, we will take questions from the audience via the comment section below. Please feel free to type in questions and comments at any time throughout this discussion. In addition to the sponsor Dave mentioned in the introductory video, special thanks to Chris Jocelyn and the staff of the Bluegrass Music Hall of Fame and Museum for their support of today's event. So, Keith, you're a journalist, and in the early 80s, you had interviewed a lot of people who knew Arnold Schultz. So why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about why he's significant and about your article and some of the information you gleaned.
I think it was about 1979. I was reading Bill Malone's Country Music USA, History of Country Music, and he included bluegrass in that. And he mentioned that Arnold Schultz had been a big influence on Bill Monroe. And I didn't know a lot about bluegrass then. I didn't know anything about Arnold Schultz. But Rosine, Kentucky, is about 40 miles from Owensboro, so it's the next county over. I called Wendell Allen, the bluegrass musician down there, and asked him if was Arnold Schultz still alive. I was hoping he was. He wasn't. And he found all sorts of people down there who had worked with him, knew him, his cousin, who was 87 years old at the time. And early 1980, I went down and interviewed all these people. Wendell Allen took me around to meet them, introduced me. And it was great. His cousin, Ella Schultz Griffin, was still alive. She was 87 years old in a nursing home. She played with Arnold in 1911 with the Schultz family band. I said, was it blues? And she said, no, it was hillbilly. And I mean hillbilly. And she had a good laugh. And so that's basically where it came in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dom, you said you had some questions about the article.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, as I was reading the article, of course, you know, we named the panel off of this beautiful section here that you wrote about Arnold, where you mentioned that he would be considered the godfather of bluegrass music, but it's a style that he never heard. And I'd love it if you could elaborate just a little bit on, you know, why that would be, why Arnold Schultz would not have played bluegrass music per se, but still have been a significant influence upon the music itself.
Bill Monroe always claimed that bluegrass started with him in 1939 when he joined the Grand Ole Opry, and then other people say it wasn't bluegrass till Earl Scruggs and Lester Flatt joined the band. And so, you know, theoretically, there wasn't bluegrass before at least 1939. But Bill Monroe, Arnold Schultz, and Pendleton Vandiver, Bill Monroe's uncle, played square dances, other kinds of dances, round dances in Ohio County back in the 20s, early 30s. And Bill followed them around, and he, you know, theoretically picked up a lot from that. People I talked to said that Arnold Schultz was the first person they ever heard play lead on the guitar, and they never heard an A chord. In some of the songs, he taught them how to put an A chord in there. And Birch Monroe said he never heard him play guitar. He said he was a fiddle player. So,
This is a common thing in country music, of like Hank Williams. His first guitar teacher was an African American musician. Jimmy Rogers learned a lot working on the railroad with Black musicians. So a lot of people of that age, that first generation of country music people, they seem to have a Black mentor somewhere.
Absolutely, and of course Arnold Schultz, his influence upon bluegrass music, which of course, when we think of bluegrass, it is grounded within the old time string band music as we would imagine it, with the early British Isles music, as well as the hoedowns and the various types of music there. But there is a special quality that is akin to early jazz that is set within bluegrass, where you have musicians breaking off and playing solos. I found it very interesting to read in the article that the Arnold Schultz may be the first person that, at least in the county, was heard to play guitar leads over a square dance band or a string band. And I mean, what a phenomenal musical innovation to bring into the area. Of course, it gets me thinking about two musicians actually who are well known as guitar players, but started out as fiddlers as well. Big Bill Brunsey and Lonnie Johnson. And hearing their early recordings, they were very powerful fiddlers, but they ended up innovating their style into becoming very distinctive guitar players. So it got me thinking of echoes of those musicians. Of course, Schultz didn't record, but when you hear Big Bill Brunsey and Lonnie Johnson in particular, they really championed themselves on sounding very original, but also sounding very innovative with the choices that they made on their guitars. So it's kind of even interesting to think of a musical environment where there may be one chord or three chord songs, or sometimes two chord fiddle tunes, and then all of a sudden someone brings in that extra 3-4 chords that just change everything. But I'd love to see what Dr. Brown would say about that, being a well-versed mandolinist as well. And you also spoke with Bill Monroe about Arnold's influence as well on him.
I spoke with Bill when I first started playing bluegrass. Ralph Rinsler came out with an article in Sing Out called the Daddy of Bluegrass, Bill Monroe, the Daddy of Bluegrass, and he mentioned Arnold Schultz in his article, and he talked about how Arnold Schultz. I think that he was very. It's interesting. He was. He kind of missed the point of Arnold's fiddle playing, because he kind of didn't describe it as. He said, well, it was bluesy and not often heard in those parts of the country. And I was kind of thinking, no, he probably played regular hoedown fiddle, because that's what he would have played for a dance. And he did talk about him being influences on maybe Merle Travis and some people, but I think it was more or less direct, indirect, and not direct. But Bill Monroe told me himself. I mean, I met Bill Monroe when I was 19 years old, and played with him at the time I was playing guitar. And then during the succeeding years I'd run into him. But I remember once in 1966 we were just sitting down in the back room of the Club 47 in Cambridge, and we were talking about, and he was talking about he said, well, there was this colored fiddler that I used to play with, and he'd talk about Arnold in very very hushed tones, and he very respected his music, his musical ability. And he made a point of telling me that a lot of his runs and the blues that he puts into his music, he says, well, I'm not saying I copied him exactly, but I have a lot of blues in my music. And one of the reasons I really admired Arnold's playing, and it's you could really tell that he really meant that. And he talked about him playing square dance with him, and at times they would play and they would end up playing until, they'd end up playing till dawn because people were having such a good time. And Bill actually played guitar himself. And Bill was the one who actually basically emulated Arnold's style. And he kind of picked it up. And so Bill hired Arnold to play. Arnold hired Bill to play with him at Square Dances. So he gave him his first gigs. That was the way I got it. And and that's true. And he would tell me, he said, well, he would take a straight pick and just play these pretty runs, while my Uncle Pen was playing the fiddle, and I would listen to those runs, and I try to save them for later on for my, when I thought about making my own music, so it's not, that this is true, that's, that's in it, you can't say that Arnold invented bluegrass, but he had a lot of influence on people, and Arnold probably had a lot of influence on people who never, because they picked up things that people said, well, Arnold Schultz did this, and they might have got a second or third hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, you want to talk about Arnold's playing. I remember there was maybe about 20 years ago, or maybe even more, there was probably a documentary on the Everly Brothers. And I remember that one of the Everly Brothers said, well, he said, I remember when my dad was little, when we were growing up, he would say, well, people just, people that want to learn anything about guitar, they would just go over to Arnold's cabin and just sit down outside and just listen to what he was playing, because he'd have the up-to-date, musical styles, because he would go traveling all over in the wintertime, maybe go down to New Orleans and listen to music down there and travel all around, and then come back to Rosine and, maybe work in the coal mines and play music at night, that sort of thing. So, a lot of people were, influenced by him. But especially Monroe, I can hear, you can hear the blues. When I first heard Monroe in person and heard his band in person and not on a recording, it was kind of obvious that it kind of really had this heavy blues influence, and it was very striking how it was different,
Wonderful. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that there's it's like a tone and a flavor, because that's one of the things I've been trying to wrap my mind around when I'm thinking about when we think of blues. Because looking back on a couple of the different articles that people have written, it's interesting to see that even the idea of blues inflection being a choice of notes in the scale, or the choices of playing blues like we would conventionally think about it, like very blue or emotional or whatnot. It's interesting to see that Arnold Schultz story also has an ambiguity to it, where because especially in bluegrass, hitting the blue notes, a lot of times it's not a bend like a guitar necessarily, but there's sort of a certain trill or run that you make within the scales, and it's interesting to know that there's someone like Arnold Schultz in the background that's fueling musical ideas more so than, or he's playing the music at the same time. But it's interesting to see that the musical ideas are quite multifaceted instead of them just being one series of vocabulary. It's multiple, which is very, very neat. Kind of thinking along those lines, Keith, I would love to ask you a little bit about one of the interesting characters that shows up in your article a lot, Forrest Boots Fott. Now, Mr. Fott you mentioned that he played the jug, and also that he was in a Dixieland jazz band when you were interviewing him at the time. Where one of the things I've always wondered about is if Arnold Schultz in any way had made his way out to Louisville and played with the jug bands and some of the musicians like Clifford Hayes, or there's mention of him traveling and meeting people like Jelly Roll Morton or Louis Armstrong or whatnot. But I wondered if Mr. Fott had mentioned anything about jug band music in Kentucky specifically, and if that was connected in any way to Arnold Schultz and his experiences working with him.
No, the people in Ohio County just talked about what he did in Ohio County. I don't know if they knew he went into other places. Apparently, he played whatever was needed, whatever was paying money at the time. He played Dixieland and whatever with Boots. He played Hillbilly with his family band. He don't tell me what all else he played with different places. But he was, they, had the dances and. I always thought Prohibition in the 1920s, there weren't any taverns and places like that. But shoot, Boots Fott talked about the time they knocked down the walls in a tavern in Ohio County. And moonshine was flowing. Oh, golly. But so he, one time he said some guy gave him a gallon of moonshine to let him into the dance because he didn't have a dime. And they sat there, him and Arnold sat there and drank the whole gallon, and Arnold was asleep, still playing guitar, he says. Great musician.
Yeah. It makes me think about how many other like seminal artists that have been forgotten just because they didn't record. You
look at Huddy Ledbetter. If the Lomaxes hadn't gone to Angola prison, who would have heard of him today?
Yeah.
And all the influence he's had on musicians through the years.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting to think as we're talking about this sort of vocabulary, or I even think about it. Just hearing you describe Arnold Schultz, it reminds me of someone like Reverend Gary Davis when he was in New York City, where part of Gary Davis's legacy was that he had his big guitar that he just would play, and he was quite open to taking on students and showing them new chord changes and whatnot. And that in of itself led to a guitar playing generation that's still with us today. So it's kind of interesting to think of Arnold Schultz as being sort of a very open-ended story, because it would be interesting to even think, because I even think about like Johnny Dodds, for example, the New Orleans clarinetist who recorded with the Louisville Jug Band and also with Louis Armstrong, but he has recordings of a small trio with a guitar player by the name of Bud Scott, who does this very interesting low bass note picking, and he does all these guitar solos on a lot of the early recordings. And they recorded, I was looking it up, they recorded around 1925, 1926, 1927, so it could almost have run sort of a parallel sort of timeline where I would wonder if the music was coming to Arnold, if Arnold was coming to the music, or what. I would love to know the places that they met up. That I would love to know.
There's a crossover kind of legend part with Robert Johnson, because his family claimed that Arnold was poisoned by bad whiskey because the white musicians were jealous of him. It's the same thing as Robert Johnson, but his death certificate said it was a mitral heart disease, or how you pronounce that word. Basically a heart attack. 45 years old.
That's a shame too. The young age, And so, so I guess there are a couple of things that I've read. Like, well, there's the A chord, of course. And that to me, actually, we've been blessed recently to find a second photo of Arnold Schultz that shows a picture, as well as Luther, Arnold's brother, on the bull fiddle. And one of the things I noticed in that photograph is that the upright bass has the extra German string extension on it, which to me implies that they could then do, they could put the A chord within their chord progressions. You could do a 1-6-2-5, which is and that's something that I found was just an interesting little note within that singular photograph. Also, I noticed that Luther has his hat on top of the bass, and in a certain way, it reminds me of all of the comic bassists that are a definitive part of bluegrass music. And it almost implied that in some ways Schultz could have also, they could have brought that aspect of showmanship of having a comic bassist who's telling jokes and doing a buck dance. And, I would wonder if there was anybody who had thoughts on that second photograph that's come up recently.
It's interesting. His cousin said he never wanted his picture taken just in case he ever got in trouble.
He would have never made it in the digital era. I don't we got Arnold caught on YouTube,
Yeah. I'm interested what other kind of music was going on in Ohio County. Like, what did Arnold Schultz grow up listening to?
String band music, I guess. Whatever you call music back then, when sitting around the back porch playing music and stuff. There were several other black musicians working in Ohio County then. I think he worked with a black band, some contest in Unionburg County, and Lutz Falk said he thought the only reason he didn't win was because of color. He said they were definitely the best band there. There were a couple of other black musicians. They just didn't work with Bill Monroe. They were supposedly very good too. Mm-hmm. Probably every county in the country, but just didn't get the attention.
So, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the Arnold Schultz Fund, which Dr. Brown, I think that you helped set that up.
Yes, I'm the co-chair. It kind of ended up as a challenge. It was kind of started. It was an IBMA Bluegrass leadership meeting online, and I think someone challenged it, and I kind of Fred Bartenstein is a good friend of mine for many years. He actually emailed me and said, "Hey, this is the time is right, and so I decided, hey, we'll do this, Of course, I have a lot of free time, as you can hear from all the things I'm doing, and right in the middle of the pandemic, still being busy, but it was kind of it was great. I got together a bunch of a few great people, and we decided to start doing this. And I think we've done pretty well. I've got Neil Rosenberg, who's a noted historian of bluegrass music, and also a fine banjo player, and also a fine teacher and mentor. He's an emeritus now at Memorial University, and that's up in the Maritime provinces of Canada. And actually, Neil came on, and then Erica Brady, who's in Kentucky, who's knows an awful lot about Arnold Schultz and has done a lot of research. She's at the University of Western Kentucky, and she's also had a radio show on a station there. And then you've got Trisha Tubbs, who was basically on the she's on Wintergrass, and so she came on, and Sav Sankaran. Sav is East Indian in origin, and he was raised in Pittsburgh, and he's a great bass player, great tenor singer. He's works for Orvis, and he does that. He's actually working with Orvis and
what kind of projects are you funding?
Well, our projects that we're funding are basically we're trying to have people of color encourage people in color, and actually of color, and fund things like the one we're speaking on now, we actually have given we've given a grant to the Louisville Folklore Center. We've done other other individuals. We've done people who are running programs like Annie Beach out in Arizona. She has Jam Pack. She's been doing a lot of work teaching, African American kids, Hispanic kids, and we're trying to get people involved. I mean, through the years, I've met a lot of bluegrass musicians who are basically musicians of color, of all stripes, so to speak, that play bluegrass and no one knows about them. And I want to kind of encourage them to come out of the closet and encourage more people.
Is Arnold Schultz's influence on the beginnings of bluegrass being acknowledged more, or is the knowledge out there?
Well, I think one of the things is I'm very happy that now people know about Arnold Schultz, because people that I know that have been playing bluegrass a long time didn't even know that Arnold played the fiddle. I said, well, he did play the fiddle, and he played banjo too, and probably played piano and a lot of other instruments, because that's how skilled a musician he was. But I said he was primarily a guitar and a fiddle player. And they kind of go, wow, I never knew that. And I never knew that he was, I never knew that he met with Bill Monroe. No one ever knew about that. I mean, I was rather disappointed when they had the Bill Monroe 100th anniversary gathering in 2011, that, I was asked to be in a play with Bill Monroe and play the guitar, and I said no. I said Arnold Schultz was a fiddle player. I said, just think about a fiddle play, a mandolin and a guitar at a square dance. That's not what people wanted. You just have to use your common sense to think about that. But I think it's stereotyping, racial stereotyping. Oh, black people don't play this kind of music. Black people don't play the fiddle, and that's not true. And black people like country music. My parents weren't. My parents liked country music too, as well as other musics we had around the house. We had all kinds of music, so it wasn't. And I'm from New York, and there's a lot of bluegrass, because I grew up during the Great Folk Scare, and that's, a lot of people were playing bluegrass, and I heard it and I said, hey, I want to play that music. And I liked it, and it became an obsession with me. And I guess it still is.
So when did you first hear about Arnold Schultz?
1963, I read, early in 1963, actually in January, Arnold Schultz was mentioned in Ralph Rensler's article in Sing Out magazine. So we, that was our first introduction. And, he actually sort of talked at length about Arnold Schultz and his, his influence on music in Kentucky. It probably wasn't as much as people know now, but, now we know a lot more, and there have been a lot more. I mean, this is 1963 I'm talking about, and it's 2021, and we have the internet, and we have a lot of people doing research. So that this is all very important. This is all very important in advancing the music, and kind of bringing a unified view of music. It's kind of like music belongs to everybody. That's what I say. That's what I say to everyone. I mean, one of the first people I actually played bluegrass with he was Japanese. He was actually originally from Japan, but he played bluegrass, and he was from the next town over from me. But there were a lot of people around who played bluegrass. Not everybody who you would think would be a stereotypical bluegrass person. it was people heard the music and they liked it. And so it's like I said, music is for everybody, and you've got to follow what you like. So that's what I say. But it's really interesting to hear all of this other background research on Arnold Schultz, because he is an important figure. And whether or not he influenced this person or the other, he was a very important figure in Kentucky music. He'd probably be better known then, but at least hopefully posthumously we can honor him now.
Keith, what was the reception to your article?
This was 40 years ago, you understand.
Yeah.
I don't remember many people commenting on it at all. Because it's 40 years ago. They might have. It was reprinted in the next year in the John Edwards Memorial Foundation magazine. Mm-hmm. And a woman in Australia sent some money over to for a marker, tombstone, something for his grave. And I gave it to somebody in Ohio County, and I don't know whatever happened to the money, but they didn't do anything until 1994. He just had a rock on his grave until that time. People raised some money, put a nice memorial there on his grave, and a picture of a guitar etched into it. But so it honestly got more attention outside of this area than it did in this area, I think.
Yeah, I think the same thing with jug bands. I get more emails and stuff from outside Kentucky about my book than actually inside. Yeah. Dom, when did you encounter Arnold Schultz, his legacy, and did it influence you at all?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I first came across it in Bill Malone's book as well, in Country Music USA. And I guess that was around 2002 or so. And I started to play guitar in 1999, I guess. And I went to my local folk festival in Phoenix. And one of the main types of music they had for jamming was bluegrass. And so if you weren't an individual performer, then you usually got into the bluegrass jam. That was sort of the thing you could do if you wanted to just be doing something else. And so I learned to jam with a lot of people with my guitar, or I learned to do just harmonica. Then later on with banjo. And then as I picked up the jug, then I started playing jug. So I started to just be an auxiliary musician for jams over in my local scene. And so when I read about Arnold Schultz, kind of like all the other mysterious influences of country music that appear, I added him first as just a singular character within the story. But with his particular piece of the musical puzzle, at first, the story of Bill Monroe's, Bill Monroe's relationship with him as a musician is a point of entry. But once you start getting into the story of finger-picked lead guitar within either in the old-time fiddle context or in the sort of Travis picking style of picking, it starts to bring a new part of the story into the mix. And then, of course, there's also, I have the Prairie Ramblers over here, and the stories that Tex Atchison told about working with Arnold, and how Arnold's fiddling, and he mentioned swing tunes being a part of what really influenced him about Arnold's playing. So when you think of the Prairie Ramblers then becoming the backup band for Patsy Montana and helping to birth Western swing as an art form, then all of a sudden Arnold Schultz begins to take on a very multifaceted role as a innovator. So it to me it's just grown over time, and so I've always tried to pick up anything I can on anything that mentions Arnold Schultz. And then, of course, as you and I have talked about jug band music, Clifford Hayes and that generation of black string band music from Kentucky. They've laid out a foundation as well of a jazz and old time sort of based music that is neither fully jazz nor ragtime nor string band music, but sort of a little bit of everything. It would be, I just would love to imagine Arnold Schultz being in the mix with those guys, and then either deciding to go straight up to Chicago or down to New Orleans to pick up a few more, jams, And so, that was my intro to Arnold Schultz, but it still, in many ways, continues to reinforce what Bill Monroe and Charlie were able to do when they decided to take whatever influences they took from Arnold and move it forward into what would become bluegrass music. It still tells a lot of the interchange and the interactions, and also the way that music can grow when when you mix it up. I mean, I found an interesting article with you, Dr. Richard, with Pete Feldman talking about rhythm on bluegrass, where there was a conversation about, with blues and swing, a lot of that music tends to lay on the backbeat, while a lot of bluegrass music tends to lean on the front of the beat. And it's interesting to me when I think of ragtime. Ragtime is another type of music that lands on the front of the beat. And I would even wonder if Arnold Schultz was a ragtime musician who started bringing blues into his music as he's bringing all this music into his local community. The pathways tend to grow, and it kind of becomes endless, because of course we think of the Prairie Ramblers. Of course they get Bill Monroe onto record, and then Chet Atkins and Merle Travis also tell the tale. So it's kind of a
yeah. It's interesting on Bill Monroe's first cut that he did on. He played the guitar on the on Mule Skinner Blues, and he played the Doghouse Blues and Mule Skinner Blues. You can feel that rhythm. I mean, I don't think anybody really played the kind of guitar he wanted until Lester Flatt joined the band and Earl Scruggs. They kind of got the rhythm. And bluegrass is kind of heavy on the backbeat too. It's kind of, Monroe liked to play a little bit out in front, pushing it a little bit, but there's also this heavy backbeat too, with the kind of like keeping that really solid rhythm behind it. But if you listen to Bill's playing on Mule Skinner Blues and Doghouse Blues, and those are 1939, 1940 recordings, you can hear that. You can hear his guitar, it goes doom to doom to doom to doom to doom. You can hear that rather than just kind of hearing a lot of maybe the kind of more staid, there wasn't quite the life of, it was, basically old time fiddle backup was a little bit different,
Sure.
And Bill had it. I mean, it was basically like, it's pretty close to rock and roll. And maybe that's, bluegrass all of a sudden, became this new rock and roll music, kind of, the rock and roll of old time music. It's a different beat, and that's maybe that was a draw in the interplay between the musicians, that always, but that's but now you hear it everywhere. I mean, Chuck Berry said he got a lot from Bill Monroe. He got a lot of his guitar playing and playing on the, playing all the, all the downstrokes on his guitar playing.
Yeah, I could see that. Just wow. I mean, it would be amazing to be able to just pick Bill Monroe's brain about, or have just a 5-minute interview with him just talking about guitar. There's a great clip online of a backstage jam where he's playing a little bit of guitar, which is just a real treat if anybody gets the chance to find that one. It's maybe 30 seconds, and I think he's playing an electric guitar, and it's
that's right. Yes, I remember that. He's playing Blue Moon in Kentucky. On an electric guitar.
Yeah, we talked a lot about Arnold Schultz's influence on Bill Monroe, but can you speak a little bit about the Western guitar the finger picking style and his influence on that. No, he indirectly influenced Merle Travis there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, go ahead.
Let's see. I'm forgetting his first name right now. Kennedy.
Kennedy Jones.
Kennedy
Kennedy
Jones.
Yeah, he was. He passed his on to Bill Monroe, but he had learned a lot of licks and things from Arnold Schultz. I talked to some of the musicians down there who had been influenced by Kennedy Jones, and they said they don't think the what's called the Travis style now came from Arnold Schultz, but they came from Kennedy Jones. But they said Kennedy Jones was, I guess, a disciple of Arnold Schultz. He would go over, pick with him and pick his brain and learned a lot of stuff from that. And of course, Chet Atkins picked up from Merle Travis, and I guess everybody picked up from him. So.
Yeah, that's right.
And the Everly Brothers, I think Kennedy Jones was a big influence on Ike Everly, their father. So
Yeah.
We
it all
have,
comes back to Arnold at some point.
yeah. We have a few questions from the audience. See, one question is that was Schultz or his family, friends, and Keith Oracle quoted as saying that he never recorded, or is it possible that there's a recording out there that hasn't surfaced?
That was pretty early in the recording era. Bulky equipment stuff. I don't know that. I mean, it'd be great if there was one.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't heard of any.
But it seems like from your article that he really shuns trying to be on any sort of recording or having any documentation left behind.
That's what his friends down in Ohio County said.
For fear of getting found out of any devilment he might have caused, you know? No less.
He said he liked whiskey and women about as much as he liked music.
All right, and
He was a human being.
Jeffrey Drake asked, since Bill Monroe and Chet Atkins are the two most influential music virtuosos in Nashville history, and both trace their musical roots directly back to Schultz, couldn't you also make an argument that he's also the godfather of music in Music City?
Think you would claim what's going on now.
Yeah.
In many ways, yes, you know, and again, one thing to keep in mind is like kind of like the North Carolina songster Leslie Riddle, you know, their style was fit within their county, and they, you know, it blended with many other things to become the final product. And so, if you think of it in that sort of way, again, it's a musical vocabulary, and I think Arnold Schultz is part of that. Again, if you think of it, I'll See You in My Dreams being a specific type of jazz number from the teens. It leads itself into in jazz. There's another song called I Got Rhythm, which is the foundation of bebop because of the way the melody's laid out. But if I'll See You in My Dreams, it's sort of a type of song that lays out for bluegrass music, or at least some sort of idea. That's the sort of thing that Arnold Schultz set into place.
Okay. Someone wanted to know where they could get a copy of Keith's article. I think I found it on the IBMA Foundation website.
It's fantastic article.
So,
are those interviews anywhere? Are they archived anywhere, Keith?
I gave the copies to the Bluegrass Museum back in the early 90s, and the Bluegrass Museum is in a different location now, and it's gone through 5, 6, 7 directors. They might be here. I gave the tapes to them years ago, though.
Looks like the fund is going to have to help the search to go on here.
Yeah. That's yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, just being able to put the tangible facts around Arnold Schultz into one place has been amazing. And also looking up a lot of the work that you've been doing, Dr. Richard, with the fund, it's been amazing to see it really coalescing into a story that people can put together and really, be able to assess the places where country music and jazz and blues and all come together as American music.
Oh yeah, that's what it's all about. It is American music.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I remember I have you had to announce Bill Monroe as being the originator of bluegrass, American bluegrass music. That was his. I remember because I signed a contract, which I have a copy of downstairs, and people kind of it said those were the things that you had to do. You had to announce Bill Monroe as being the originator of that, and he became very aware of it because very early in Bill's career, it was kind of like, and he didn't want people copying his music. And then I think by the time that Ralph Rinsler came across them, he kind of said, that, you've actually been the one to create this musical form, and you've got to, you've got to acknowledge the fact that you created. And so I think that Bill, when I first met Bill, he kind of seemed rather taciturn. And then, years later, he would kind of be a lot more effusive and a lot more forthcoming about, what he thought belonged in his music, I mean, and he actually sat down with me, once for over an hour, just showing me how to play a couple of things in the mandolin that I, really wanted to learn because I thought they were kind of an opening into a style. But, getting in back of it, and learning about Arnold Schultz and all the other people that kind of influenced, basically I would say the Kentucky sound, the Ohio Kentucky sound, the Ohio County sound, that's really important, because a lot of times people don't know what the roots of anything are. They just think kind of, oh, this all just came out of the air. Somebody just played a couple of notes and then it all happened. And there's a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes behind creation of art forms. And and here it is. And and some branches of it will evolve into something else. You just never know. I mean, it's really important. And I think finding, carrying on, getting people involved, people of color, people that are non-traditional, like, Asian people from other countries that play bluegrass, we're interested in having them come in and find out, what this is all about. Not just thinking it's just some invention of kind of hillbillies and somewhere in the hills and that's about it. It's because I've read a lot of older liner notes, and it's just totally way off the tracks of what bluegrass is and where it actually came from, where Arnold Schultz came from. It's kind of trying to separate musics out and for markets, and that's what we're all trying. We want to kind of show that there's a real integration on music form.
We have a couple other questions. Gerald Murray wants to know, is there any connection between Arnold Schultz's style and Reverend Gary Davis's style? They seem very similar as finger pickers up the guitar neck if you consider the Travis style as coming from Schultz and Kennedy Jones. So,
well, I wouldn't say there's any direct connection per se, except for the fact that they use their thumb and their forefinger to pick the guitar, which is a distinctive part of upper Southern Piedmont style of finger-styled guitar. So in those ways, those are similar. But Gary Davis has a whole other style of playing. The only reason I mentioned it was that in Gary Davis's career, you can find the documentation to show that he taught a lot of different guitar players, and through that, there are a lot of country blues guitar players that are still playing to this day that are highly influenced by Reverend Gary Davis. But there, just by the mechanics of the guitar and playing jazz on the guitar, there probably are a couple of different melodic ideas that I could say have some similarity. But again, without recordings of Arnold Schultz, we'll never truly know what he sounded like when he picked.
Barry Smith wants to know, he said the Monroe biography, Can't You Hear Me Calling, by Richard Smith, says Monroe was impressed by how Schultz paired blues songs with waltzes. Can you talk about how Schultz might have influenced the famous waltzes like Blue Moon of Kentucky?
Ooh, yeah, that's an interesting one.
There's a good one. Bill claims he wrote that when he was, I guess he was out one night looking at the moon and thought of Blue Moon of Kentucky, and that's what. But yeah, I suppose. But you think about the Kentucky Waltz. There's another one. I mean, that has those blue notes in it. But maybe there's also a little Chicago influence in those things, because I mean, Bill did go to Chicago every once in a while and listen to the blues players, because he was working in Indiana before he and his brother took off to play. They decided that working in an oil refinery wasn't a good future, and all of these influences. I mean, maybe meeting Arnold kind of let Bill into that. Bill's ear was attuned to that, because he did like what he considered black music. He kind of liked the blues, and he wanted to include that again in his playing. So that could definitely be that was definitely an influence. Arnold opened his ears, and that's what he wanted. I mean, and that's why the Monroe brothers broke up, because Bill wanted to start his own. He wanted to play his own style of music. He had his own ideas, and he had different rhythmic ideas than Charlie had, and so so there you go. Bill got a chance to leave and go out on his own.
Okay. Well, Brian Farrow wants to know, is there any evidence of Schultz's influence farther north since he traveled a lot?
There's the evidence. Hey, Brian, and Brian plays.
Hi, Brian.
Brian plays upright bass with me sometimes, as well as plays with the Gangsta Grass. So
that's right.
He's a little bit of a ringer in here coming in. We don't have more information on where exactly Arnold Schultz, went every summer, but it seems like he traveled all the way up and down the Mississippi River, and as I've sort of implied as we've been going along, there are a lot of different musical, pathways that Arnold Schultz could have come in contact with at any point along the line, especially in the years that he was performing. Actually, in Keith's article, there's that fiddle contest. I was actually really intrigued by the description of the instruments that were a part of the band, where there were calfskin head instruments, where there was a mandolin. It was a mandolin, a tenor banjo, a guitar, and then I think a banjo guitar. But it was a couple of different things: a tenor banjo and a banjo guitar as a part of the band. And it got me thinking of again, people like Papa Charlie Jackson or Johnny St. Cyr, who were playing banjo guitars. And it would even just be an interesting notion to think if Arnold Schultz was keeping up to date in the way that even he would change the instruments as the years went by, because he's, these are also the years a decade before where James Reese Europe has broken the color line at Carnegie Hall in 1912 with a 125-piece banjo orchestra. And these sort of big ideas, I'd imagine, also would translate across the country, whether it would be in slow increments, but there's no telling what Arnold Schultz was coming across in those years. I was even noticing with I'll See You in My Dreams, Gus Kahn, he wrote the song Memories, which also has a great recorded version by a group called the Versatile Three, who were a banjo mandolin vaudeville troupe. And it was they have just a beautiful way of playing waltzes and things like that. So I'd even wonder if the waltzing style could be interconnected with some of those earlier popular performers from an earlier era, you know.
Yeah, we need to wind this down soon. So I wanted to give you guys a chance. I know it's such an interesting topic. I wish we had 2 hours, but I wanted to give you guys a chance to talk a little bit about Arnold Schultz's legacy or make some final comments. Dom, if you want to start out. Sure.
Well, you know, the more and more I began to search into the story, it's led into a much bigger tale of American music, and I'm just so glad that the Arnold Schultz Fund is here now to help and begin to create awareness. I've spent a lot of my career trying to, well, like Dr. Brown, you know, being a part of people of color who have joined the string band and bluegrass world that are, you know, yeah, at first when you join for the love of the music, but then when you find that there's a deeper history, you can't help but want to become involved, want to advocate, and want to move forward. And so I'm just so glad to see that this story is both a telling of the past and also a telling of the future through both Dr. Brown and Keith's wonderful article, which is still a lasting legacy of Arnold Schultz as a musician and a man.
I think that we're, you know, at the foundation, we have, if you kind of go to info at bluegrassfoundation.org, we are collecting, you know, some of the history about musicians of color and also about Arnold Schultz. We're actually collecting articles on that website, and you'll be able to hear some performances and some information about that. And we're actually collecting more and more. And I think that this is just wonderful that we're actually able to do this. And we don't, you know, we really, you know, before this, you know, it's just been kind of like a steady trickle. And like I said, I first encountered Arnold Schultz's name in 1963, you know, and here we are, it's 2021, and we're just you know, beginning to hit the tip of the ice. You know, we're getting through the tip of the iceberg, and we're actually pushing all this information out there, and I think people should know about this, and I think that people should see that music all comes together in a lot of places that people never thought about it coming together. And so I think that Arnold Schultz is an extremely important figure, and even though we have no recordings of him, it's amazing that, you know, his name keeps coming up. Everybody kind of mentions, oh, Arnold Schultz, yes, he was here. You know, it's almost like someone left a sign. You know, Arnold was here. You know, but you know, the Mississippi River. You know, like you said, people traded up and down Mississippi River. That's it. I guess we're. Do we still have time to speak?
Of just a few minutes. We got like, I think 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. Why don't
Keith, do you have anything to say?
I'm just so glad that all this is happening now, because when I wrote that story 40 years ago, it just seemed like a great movie there of his life. And then nothing really happened, and finally things have started happening now, and it's just great to see him getting this recognition. I think one of the hardest things about doing research is the fact that, shamefully, newspapers ignored the fact that there were African Americans in this country until the 1950s, unless there was a crime. And you can't find, like in the local happenings in Ohio County, you can find William Monroe came back to visit his relatives from Chicago, Hammond, Indiana, where he was living. You don't find Arnold Schultz in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and many thanks to Dom, Richard, and Keith for spending time with us to uncover more about the life of Arnold Schultz. I also like to thank the Louisville Folk School and Kentucky Performing Arts for sponsoring this series of thought-provoking webinars. And I hope you'll do more research about Arnold Schultz and do look up Keith's article because it's worth it. Thank you.